We are live.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Mahone Bay Town Council meeting on a beautiful night at the end of June. Councilors, welcome to you as well, and the staff who are joining us. You have an agenda that was emailed out to you. What is your wish with the agenda?
Worship, I'd like to add something to the agenda.
Okay,
Just a thing that came out today from Vigilant regarding the fire hall, an addendum. I just thought maybe council should discuss it. It's because it is an extra cost.
okay. CAO, you're aware of that document?
Yeah, I don't know that we need to discuss it here. I don't have any document to present, Richard. I know you got looped in on commentary, but until we have a draft addenda document for me to email around, I wasn't gonna get into
Okay.
that.
Okay,
So expect it, because there have been some questions received and a few clarifications requested on the fire station RFP, that we will end up having an addenda to issue, which is pretty common. And I'll circulate that hopefully tomorrow, but I'm not entirely sure.
okay. Richard, you comfortable with that?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, Councillor Carver?
Yes, I move we accept the agenda as circulated.
Mayor will.
Seconded.
Do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor seconds. All in favor? Motion's carried. Councillor Feeney, do you have a comment?
No, I'm fine, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, just wait 1 second. Yeah. Okay, then let's go to the minutes of the regular meeting. Do we have a seconder? Of June 9th. All in favor? We've got a delay going on
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah,
I'll move they be accepted as circulated.
I'll second that.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Bain. All in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go to the special meeting of June 11th.
Move that they be accepted as presented.
Thank you, Councillor
Second
Feeney, seconded by Councillor Now. All in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go to the special meeting of June 11th.
To be approved, to circulate it.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Bain. All in favor? Motion's carried. And finally, the special meeting of June 16th.
So move.
Moved by Councillor Carver,
Seconded.
seconded by Councillor O'Neill. All in favor? Motion's carried. June has been a busy month. We have no delegations or individuals, and we have 2 pieces of correspondence for action. One of them is from Rebecca Cross. That, I believe, is the one that yes, the Nova Scotia strong sign. Is anyone wish to speak to that? Councillor Feeney.
Mayor, I just had a comment. I think, the council and yourself are well aware of the Rotary and all of the charitable things they do. I am concerned about the request to have that sign located in the area of the Vic, however. I think traditionally that particular plot of land, which is kind of focused on the historical cemetery, and of course we are in the midst of a beautification initiative, which will be talked about later on in this meeting. And as well, we have a number of centennial related activities that are getting completed around interpretation and signage in that space. So that space, I think we've had a tendency historically to leave a little uncluttered and focusing on the primary focus, which is that historical interpretation signage, and of course the focus on the cemetery. So I would suggest that a location in town is probably appropriate for the sign. I'm just not, in my opinion, that particular area may not be the most appropriate place to put the sign.
Okay. Yes, Clerk.
Sorry, Councillor Feeney was faster than I was. I just wanted to let you know from a staff perspective, once we received the request, we also forwarded it to the Chamber of Commerce. and the Vic so that they were aware of the offer and to see if they had anything to add. They actually have made arrangements. They are very much in favor of that idea, and they have made arrangements to add a flower bed to a sign like they did in Lunenburg there. I don't know if anyone's seen the one that they referenced in the letter by the tennis courts. So the Chamber of Commerce would like that to go there, and they want to put in a flower box and have it right in front of the Vic. So to Councillor Feeney's point, it would be away from the other pieces that you mentioned, but and I certainly don't mean to counter Councillor Feeney. He was just quicker with his hand than I was. Sorry.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Carver.
Yes, that's an interesting question. Then whose decision is it? That is town land, I believe. Is it the Chamber's decision or Council's decision?
I believe as it being town land, I would suggest it's a town decision. The building is the town's building. The Vic itself belongs to the town and not to the chamber.
Just the way that the clerk reported that bit of information, it sounded as if a decision had been made by the chamber. So I'm hearing that then as a recommendation from the chamber.
I would suggest, clerk, would you agree?
My understanding is that the chamber is very much in favor of it, and that is what they would like to have happen. Staff reached out to them because we wanted to know when it came to council, did they have any problem with that request, or did they feel that that was a good addition to the Vic, just rather than if council decided to go ahead with the and accept the offer, that rather than it just appearing in front of them, we thought it best to connect with them.
Councillor O'Neill?
I had, my question is, are any other locations proposed or being considered? Have you discussed any other locations, Maureen?
Locations within the town?
Yep.
No, that was the offer that we received, and it was really directed toward the town as a whole. So
Okay.
we just brought the full offer to council.
So, and just as a follow-up to that, is the offer being made contingent on the sign being located at the Vic?
I don't know.
Okay, Councillor Bain?
From what I read in it, that was their suggestion, but they were willing to consider other locations. I think that was right in the memo, wasn't it?
Okay.
That, my question was, is the sign there forever, or is it just for the year?
In the town of Lunenburg, they obviously received a similar offer and they accepted it. And they accepted it with the understanding that it would be taken down in a year.
Okay.
Okay, Deputy Mayor?
I'd like to put a motion on the floor that we give the Rotary Club permission to erect the sign in front of the Vic for a period of 1 year.
Okay,
I'll
moved,
second that.
seconded by Councillor Bain. On the question. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Motion's carried. Okay, let's go to a letter we received from Val Herder concerning tree trimming practices. Does anyone wish to speak to that one? Councillor Carver, please.
Thank you. The letter from Ms. Herder, I think, has two main requests. And she summarized the concerns about the need for careful and considered trimming of trees. And she has spoken to the usefulness of bringing in some training, some arborist training for people in the town who are trimming trees. And as you know, I have a motion on the floor, or a motion on the agenda for later on in the meeting, speaking to the idea of training. The other point that she made was the idea of inviting Dr. Peter Dunker to come to Mahone Bay and provide some advice and consultation on the Jubilee Woods. And I would like to make a motion, if it's possible at this time, to do that council direct staff to invite Dr. Peter Dunker to act as a consultant on the health of the Jubilee Woods.
Councillor Bain.
I agree with the tree trimming. However, I think a better job can be done. When it comes down to training and that sort of thing, I think we'd have to know what the costs are. This whole arborist thing can be a very costly venture. And as far as the visitor coming, I wonder if there's a cost associated with that.
Okay.
I've made a motion and I haven't heard a seconder, and so we could then have discussion after it's been seconded.
I'll second that, Mayor.
Seconded, Councillor Feeney. Okay. Mr. Hyde.
I was just hoping to get some clarification from Councillor Carver. I think there's a number of ways in which it could be useful to have some insights into the maintenance of Jubilee Woods. Is this a contractor to produce a report, or is this a contractor to advise staff? Is it a contractor to offer like a public session? Just wondering what you were thinking.
I'm thinking more to ask staff to explore that option and to consider whether there'll be costs and what that would entail and what kind of service to negotiate that.
And
You
this,
Or to bring information back to council.
Yeah, do you want to
this is
amend your,
around
because
an
your motion
assessment
was,
of
sorry,
Jubilee
David.
Woods? Councillor Carver?
I beg your pardon?
What exactly is it we're asking staff to investigate?
What services that Dr. Peter Dunker can offer in terms of consultation around the health, maintenance, support, preservation, renewal of Jubilee Woods.
Okay.
So
Mr. Hyde.
Councillor Carver, then do you want your motion to be the council direct staff to investigate what services Peter Dunker can offer with respect, like what you just said, rather than that we invite him?
Yes, thank you.
Maureen, oh wait, Joe, are you good with that?
No, I'm fine. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I think
Maureen,
Councillor
you
Bain?
get that?
Councillor Bain's got his hand up.
Yeah, as long as it's very clear that there's a cost associated with that so that we can revisit it.
And this, I presume, is part of the direction to staff to determine what the costs might be to have Mr. Dunker come down to do that review with us.
The reason I asked
Counselor?
that question is because that's not indicated in the original motion by Councillor Carver, the cost aspects.
Okay. Councillor Now?
Yeah, I was just wondering exactly what area are we talking when we're saying Jubilee Woods?
Councillor Carver?
My understanding is that Jubilee Woods is the area that was designated in the gift of deed from the
Women's
not the
Institute.
the group that donated the property in the first place. It runs from just opposite the Legion, from the duck pond up to the trail, and then to the power line and over to the tennis courts, roughly. That's my understanding.
Okay.
That was given to the town by the Women's Institute.
Thank you. That was what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, Councillor Carver and I were afforded the opportunity to do a walkabout with the Talking Trees team in the last week or so. And there are a number of items that I think, you know, the entire council would also agree that would be of concern regarding the deterioration of those woods due to a huge spike of usage. And so, you know, when Mahone Bay is a popular place to visit and we are never more popular than we are now. And because of that popularity, there's higher volumes of impact on that area. And it's now becoming something that this council and a future council will probably need to deal with in a more holistic way. I think the letter also illustrates that the community as a whole has a higher expectation for the overall management of I think Councilor Carver said this 2 or 3 years ago. I'd never heard the term before, but I think it's appropriate now, that like the urban canopy. So these are things, I'll be frank, like personally, this wasn't something that I personally thought a lot about several years ago, but now it's becoming more and more of an issue that's important to a lot of members of the community. And I think Councilor Carver has a number of items later on in the agenda, which we'll start to get at that. But this is more than, I think, just a couple of ill-fated tree cuts. If you drive up Pleasant Street, and if you've lived on Pleasant Street a long time, I mean, that the street has changed a lot and the foliage has changed a lot, and that impacts people in town, and that it's starting to become more of an issue of concern. I'm sure you hear it from citizens as well.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion on the floor, moved and seconded. That step, Councillor Bain.
Okay, I'd like to hear the motion because I never heard an agreement that the cost of the visit and this sort of thing was clarified in the motion.
Clerk, do you want to give us the motion?
That is one thing that I would like clarified as well. I will tell you what I have, and then there's one section that we will see whether that is what people want to include or not. That council directs staff to research consultation services provided by Dr. Peter Dunker surrounding the health, maintenance, and renewal of Jubilee Woods, and report back to council, including associated costs.
With an estimate of costs. All right,
If that's agreeable to the mover and seconder.
mover and seconder.
Yes,
Agreed,
fine.
agreed.
No,
Councillor Bain?
Well, I still have a problem about, it seems to me there's two issues here. One is the pruning issue. And now we're off onto the Jubilee Park. So if you can put a cost in for both of those items, I'll support it.
Councillor Carver?
Yes, I tried to point out the separation of the two issues at the beginning when I first began speaking. There were two major points that Valerie Herder was making in her letter. One was about the recommendation for training. And I said that one of the motions that I have on the agenda later in the meeting speaks to training. So the motion that I've just made has nothing to do with training. It has to do with consultation around what we as a town might be able to do to support the health of the Jubilee Woods.
Yeah, so the notion around training will come later in this meeting when you get to your next motion.
Yes, that was.
Yes, okay. Councillor Bain, are you comfortable with that?
Yes, I am. Yep.
Okay, we have a motion moved and seconded. You've heard the motion. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Correspondence, we have five up, sorry. Mr. Hyde?
I'm very sorry to interrupt, David. I know it's irregular, but council did receive a request to consider a piece of correspondence that I was addressing Richard's question on the fire station during the approval of the agenda. I didn't have a chance to prompt, but it's obviously at council's discretion, but I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that we didn't add it to the agenda. So if council were comfortable, you still could, or if nobody intended to, I don't mean to be out of line in prompting that. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't accidentally missed.
And the piece of correspondence is, Mr. Hyde?
It was from Shelley Rayfuse of Lunenburg Pride.
Yep, okay. It has to do with the upcoming festival and the flag and the crosswalk, I think. Council, have you all seen that letter?
Yes.
Does anyone have an issue with us not adding that to the agenda now?
Mayor,
Councillor Feedy.
Mayor, I'd move that we add those two items to the new business.
Okay. Do we
I
have a
second that.
seconder? Councillor O'Neill seconds it. Going to move it to new business. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you, Mr. Hyde, for bringing that up. LGBTQ+. Okay, that's under new business. Let's go to our information correspondence. We have 5 items. What is your wish?
Motion to receive and file the information items.
Moved and seconded by Councillor Now. Councillor Feeney or Councillor Carver on the question?
Yes, I just want to point out that the letter 5.1 from Mayor Rachel Bailey, in fact, I believe is an action item because she is essentially asking us if we would join the town of Lunenburg in expressing our openness to preliminary discussions about the transit report. So on that basis, I would like to make a motion that the town of Mahone Bay indicate that the town is open to preliminary discussions following the same wording that Mayor Bailey has in her letter.
Okay. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor O'Neill seconds on the question. Questions, comments? Mr. Hyde?
I just wanted to get some clarification on, and we don't have to, but are we stating that we have an interest if all of the units agree, or would we have an interest regardless?
Well, I participated in those public transit discussions, and I thought at the time, until we were able to address the actual cost of implementing the service, because at this point it doesn't include MODL, that the town would not pursue it. Not to say that we're not open to discussing it, but that we were not interested to pursue it in practical terms at this point. However, other comments? Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, to my recollection, this is the 4th or 5th time that this item's come up before this council over the last few years. We generally end up in the same place. And I think we will continue to get random letters from random sources asking us for full-throated support for moving forward. But we inevitably end up in the same location, to your point about, you know, unless there is an integrated, cohesive plan from all of the municipal partners, it's difficult to really see a path forward. So, you know, I'd be more intent to wait patiently for that day to come versus sending replies that don't have any weight behind them. But I mean, that's the same point I would have made a year ago, and a year and a half before that, and 2 years before that. So we'll stand with anticipation. We'll see what happens.
Councillor Carver.
The value, I believe, in indicating our openness to preliminary discussions is that we keep the openness obvious, that we're indicating that we're not backing off, that we're not ignoring it. Thinking of the proverbial story of trying to open the ketchup bottle. You pass the bottle around to 10 different people, and the 10th one finally opens it. So this is, I really see the same situation here, is that every time it comes back, we're sort of turning the notch a little bit. We have to get there somehow, I believe. Transportation has come up as the one of the top issues in the preliminary feedback from the accessibility issue. And it's one of the biggest issues that's been reported during the COVID lockdown, where the transportation challenges have been the biggest barriers people are facing.
Transportation was also the biggest loss of revenue for the cities that have an urban transit system. I don't think we've ever said we're not interested. I think the last time that the request came in, we said, hey, we'll talk about it. But unless we can resolve the costing aspect, we were not particularly optimistic that it was going to be a starter soon. So, however, Councillor O'Neill?
Motion.
I just wanted to support the idea of remaining part of the dialogue. I think it's important not to signal that we are, sitting this one out, and that we are active participants in the discussion, and that our position on it hasn't changed. So it's not us that needs to do something different. It's the people holding the plans.
Okay. Any other comments?
And,
So-
and just to reiterate, the wording in the letter from Mayor Bailey is to gauging interest by reaching out and sharing with our municipal colleagues that we would be open to preliminary discussions.
Yep,
There's
that's what I understand your motion to be, Councillor Carver, that we're indicating to Mayor Bailey that we are interested to participate in those ongoing discussions.
we are open to that.
Okay. All right. You've heard the motion? All in favor? 2, 3, 4, 5. Motion's carried. Okay, let's go to La Prochaine is staff reports. Always a great read. Mr. CAO.
I believe that Maureen had something she wanted to interject there.
Oh, interject.
Sorry, Your Worship, we still have a motion on the floor about receiving and filing the other correspondence items.
Oh, that's right. She's very observant. Okay, motion to receive and file the other 4 items on that information list. All in favor? Motion's carried. So we will receive and file, and we'll go back to the staff reports. Mr. Hyde.
Sure. So the first one, as always, is the report to council. I'm just going to pull it up on, well, I guess I'll see. I assume there may be some questions. I'm here to answer questions. If so, I will pull it up on the screen.
Any questions on the wrong screen, this screen? Councillor Carver.
Thank you. So I had a question about the generator that was mentioned in the Director of Operations report, and just wondered what the planned use is for the generator, just for my information.
Oh, went by it.
It was number 2 in the operations
Thank you,
report.
Penny. Can only fit 2 on a page. There's a lot of information here. Yeah, so now, I mean, that's that, I think, a portable generator. So I think it's just for multi-purpose use. I can ask Derek if it's used for anything more in particular than that.
Yeah, I was curious about that.
Yeah, I can check on that.
I also noticed in his report that there were 8 trees removed on Kinburn around power lines on properties there. And I'm just curious about whether that was necessary to cut them right down, or whether there might have been pruning and so on. So I just didn't know about the context of that particular activity.
Okay, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I can speak about the generator. That was purchased for running the drills and hammers and stuff in construction jobs. And the trees that were cut in Kinburn Street were going to be limbed out. The owner came out and said, take them right down. He didn't want them on his property anymore. So I think that should solve those 2 questions. So they were red spruce, red pine that were planted right on the power line. So, and they had arborists come in to cut them. the electric utility, and the owner come out and says, just take them down. I don't want them in front of my property. So that's what they did.
Okay,
Thanks, Carl. Jumping in on that one. I know
Yeah.
that Phil was
I'm-
saying that that was an example of being responsive to residents who had tree concerns, even though the
Yeah.
trees came down rather than staying up.
Yeah, that was the request.
okay. Any other questions? CAO's getting off easy tonight. Hmm. Okay. Let's go to staff report on employee donation and volunteerism policy. Any questions or comments?
So this one just came forward from our last meeting because
Yeah.
council discussed the change and we were required to wait as per the policy. So that was the recommended motion, but if there are any new questions, I can certainly take them.
Mayor, I'd move the council adopt the employee donation and volunteerism policy as presented.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councillor Bain. On the motion, all in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go to temporary vending and events bylaw. The next item.
One moment, I'm just going to pull it up.
Yep.
So yeah, I guess I can say that we did receive some feedback from council in this regard. The intention of it being deferred was to give council more time to consider the pretty significant draft bylaws, and we have had some feedback. So I assume that in that regard there is probably going to be some discussion from council. I'm here to answer questions, as is Maureen.
Okay. Councillor Carver?
Well, I didn't see any questions or comments other than the ones I submitted by email, and
Mhm.
that generated a thoroughly comprehensive, detailed response from the clerk, for which I thank her. So there's a couple of things. I mean, I could proceed by making a motion to include some of the items that were discussed, and based on the feedback that came from staff. That would involve me itemizing 4 points for the temporary vending and 1 for the events bylaw. If people would like to go that way, or just to say, send it back to staff to include the suggestions that everybody has seen, and include the suggestions that make most sense, or that are most workable in staff perspective.
Councillor, I'm sorry, CAO?
So if I understand you, Councillor Carver, I think my suggestion would be, if council wants to see a draft with some revisions, that someone make a motion that staff be directed to bring back a draft and list the revisions at the level of detail that whoever is making the motion feels is necessary. So if you know very specifically, you might say, we'd like a revision such that no one can vend on a residential property, and you may not have the wording, and so that type of a suggestion could still be accommodated in a motion. Once it's on the floor, there may be other suggestions that could be added, or you could just vote on that one, and then if there is another suggestion, it could also be another motion to direct staff. So whether it's a single motion or multiple, that would be how I would interpret it.
I think I would prefer to have this document go back to staff, have staff make the adjustments. I realize it drags it out for another 2 weeks, possibly for first reading, but rather than do a single motion blanket statement, and I'm assuming there are going to be other issues that'll be brought up tonight. However, Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, I think that's good advice. I think this is a quantum leap forward, over the last 6 months as this policy's developed. There's probably still some more tweaking to go, and there'll be more tweaking down the road, I'm sure. But I wonder about the new fee structure that's embedded within this document. I wonder if the fee structure, which is something I think council is comfortable with, are we putting any businesses at a disadvantage by deferring the introduction of the new fee structure if it takes another, let's call it another month or two or three more meetings to get this ratified? I'm wondering if it's appropriate to introduce the new fee structure directly, or provide guidance that the new fee structure could be implemented now, while we wait to get the terms and conditions of the final bylaw cleaned up over the next few council meetings.
Staff, what are your thoughts on the?
Well, to that extent, the current fee structure, Mo can certainly comment if I'm incorrect on this, but I believe it's only included in the policy to the bylaw right now. Is that correct, Mo?
That's correct.
So the current policy that's in place can be amended by motion of
reflect that
council.
fee structure?
So I think that you wouldn't want to just wholesale adopt the new one because it makes references to categories of vending that aren't even included in the current bylaw. But what you can do, if what you're looking for is the daily rate or combination of that and weekend or any specific rate, you could just say be amended to add the daily rate of, and I can scroll down to that if it'd be helpful.
If I could, when you talk about new rates in the preamble to the policies, it talks about that the new permit fees and the new permit structure will reduce revenue from permit by 70%. How much money are we talking as 70%?
Your worship, that was a look at last year's, what we brought in from temporary vending permits. And
Yeah.
if we had the exact same vendors, the same amount come in, where they could go with, if they took the same amount of time, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
it would be less than that. However, this has been set up because the feedback that we have heard repeatedly from vendors and the business community, not just those who benefit from having a temporary vendor on their property, is that it would be very beneficial to have more frequent temporary vendors in town, especially during the week. So if someone wanted to set up shop on a Wednesday in town, they really wouldn't, because they'd have to pay for a full week's vendor's permit. And to just set up shop because they were free on a Wednesday and pick up the day when some of the restaurants are closed for cleaning and prep, then we wouldn't get them in here.
Okay.
But if they could pay for one day, that would probably be something that we would see.
So are you suggesting that with this new fee structure and this new policy, we will overcome that 70% reduction in permit fees?
That is what we have been advised by the business community. And it does line up well with council's, with feedback we had to, it really reemphasized the temporary nature of temporary vending. Now, again, all of this is subject to a lot of things. And this year is certainly an interesting dynamic because of the COVID shutdown and the reduced tourism. We'll see what the Atlantic bubble does for us. So this is all based on research that we did and conversations that we had before the pandemic. I shouldn't say that. These conversations were had a lot before the pandemic shut things down, but yes, we still have had those conversations since then.
Okay. CAO?
And just as an additional consideration with regards to any loss of revenue from this, one of the initial considerations in changing this bylaw approach was that we would not really be thinking of the revenue generation as the bottom line. The fees are mostly intended just to ensure a level playing field between temporary vendors and existing town businesses. So on that note, if the business community is still supportive of the fee structure, then I would suggest that it probably is still at an appropriate level, even if we see a reduction in revenue, which is not a large amount of revenue for the town.
Okay, Councillor Carver?
Yes, I think I'm going to take a stab at making a motion around a couple, 2 or 3 specific changes, and it would come back to council in draft form. So all it would be doing would be to make these small changes for consideration next time. So I move that staff make the following changes to be brought back to council in draft, to include in the draft amendment bylaw for the next council meeting.
This is the temporary vending bylaw?
In the temporary vending bylaw,
Okay,
item 2, to recommend including the word temporary to promote consistency throughout the document so that it refers to temporary vending throughout the document. So that would come back highlighted in yellow
okay.
in the next draft. Then the next one would be section 5 to alter the wording so that all the instructions are expressed as in positives. So rather than saying negative statements, say vendors are required to ... And parenthetically, I'm only referring to items that staff have already said would make sense in terms of the document. The last one, oh, no, I think that's the only 2. There was an 8.3, there was the idea of fixing up the text to clarify to clarify the wording there. It was included in the email that came from the clerk today or yesterday in response to my email. Sorry about that. It's not making the motion very clear.
Okay. Is that it, Councillor Carver?
Yes, for the vending bylaw.
Okay. Do we have a seconder?
I would second it, but also would ask for, and not necessarily an amendment. But as I was listening to the changes that Councillor Carver was recommending, I was not hearing anything substantive from the original text. And I wondered if Councillor Carver would agree with that assessment. And if so, if we might consider not delaying this particular first reading, if we can approve it on, conditionally approve it at this moment.
I'm not prepared to do that personally, but
Right.
it'll be up to council. Councillor Bain.
And my comment is, we're going to see these changes, substantive or not, at our next meeting. So that's really the only way I can proceed with this, is to see it in writing and have a chance to really look at it rather than just a verbal presentation.
Clerk, can you read back the motion as you have it from Councillor Carver?
Certainly. That staff be directed to make the following changes to be included in the amended temporary vending bylaw for consideration at the July 14th meeting of council. Sorry, I had the wrong date in there.
Okay, and then
That under section 2, the word temporary be included to promote consistency throughout the document. Under section 5, alter the wording so that all the instructions are expressed in positives. And under section 8.3, Councillor Carver said to fix up the text to clarify the wording, and I was just searching for the wording that was in that. The wording that was in the email was that we would change the start of that sentence. Those who require temporary vending permits must make application to the town of Mahone Bay, and then continue it. Is that what you meant, Councillor Carver?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
okay. Councillor Feeney.
Mayor, I'll be supporting Councillor Carver's motion, but I do believe there's been some feedback around some of the bylaws, commentary around vending in residential areas in the kind of the non-Main Street area, which would probably be worthy of some further clarification. So I'd prefer to I'm kind of where Councillor Bain is on. I'd prefer to have these changes brought back to council at the next meeting, and then that would also afford any opportunity to have that other item clarified if that is something that people are interested in.
CAO?
So Councillor Carver's motion, as Maureen just read it off, is certainly to direct staff to bring a draft back. So to add anything to the list would either be done now by friendly amendment, or you just vote on this and then somebody else makes a motion
Have a
that's worded
separate
exactly the same way, except
Yeah.
that you change what's at the bullet point. So Joe, if after this, if you wanted to do that, or anybody else wanted to, and then we won't do a bunch of separate drafts. We'll bring back one with everything, and you guys
Mm.
can decide if you're willing to accept it with everything or want to choose some part of it.
Councillor Carver, would you accept input from the rest of council as an amendment to your motion?
Absolutely. It would be a great
And-
collaborative effort.
Councillor O'Neill, you agree?
Yes.
Okay. So, in addition to what Councillor Carver has proposed, that would be put into a revised version of the policies for the next council meeting. What other issues do you feel should be given consideration?
Mayor, just to
Councillor-
reiterate the point, I can't recall the specific clause, but I would ask staff to review the item regarding vending on private property in the residential area for further evaluation.
Okay. I'm just looking through my notes here.
And there are a couple of different clauses, so I don't think you have to cite the specific clause. We'll just look at all the clauses
No,
where
that's
it
right.
is cited.
The seasonal market, regular outdoor seasonal vending location with multiple vendors coordinated under a single organizing group. It strikes me that we should specify, is that a one-day event? And we should also look at whether or not we're going to have that every week. Now, if it was a farmer's market and we could have one every week, it'd be a great idea. Right? But if it's somebody in town decides that they're going to do, some organization is going to do a market of another kind, it might not be such a good idea. So I would like to consider that we specify how many are in that word multiple. That was one. Vehicle, I think we should add that it's mobile and it's to be moved when the permit expires. So you've got something that's deemed to be a motor vehicle by the Nova Scotia Motor Vehicle Act, but it's not going to get put in one location and sit there whether or not it's got a permit. I thought that was an oversight.
Mr. Mayor, just on that last one for clarity, we do have that restriction with respect to being located on public property. So would you like us to look in this new draft at whether that restriction could be extended to private property locations as well? Because
Yes,
it is in
please.
there for public. Okay.
Private property as well. It talks in the policy about the duration, and it talks about 30 business days. Now we're open for business 5 days a week. So is that a 6-week duration, or is it 30 calendar days? There's references to both in there. Is it 30 business days or 30 calendar days?
I'm just trying to find the ref. Mo, did you find the reference?
No, I was going to ask that too.
What's that?
Where is the reference? Where are you seeing that?
I might have stuck my nose into the temporary vending policy on that 30-day piece, but I remembered that
Into
one.
the special events. Yeah, I think it's referenced
Special
the numbered.
events, yes. Talks about, except that no more than one mobile vendor space shall be issued, a permit shall be issued to a single business at a time, and no permit will be issued for a location outside of a commercial zone or property outside of a commercial zone where a business has been permitted to operate in accordance with a development agreement, which is understandable, except as expressly permitted by motion of council. I think that's fraught with future difficulties and pressures on council to respond to vendors to, in fact, let them avoid that. And it also begs the question, what about the individual that has 3 different businesses registered under 3 different names? Is that person entitled to 3 vendor spots at the same time on the same piece of property?
So would you like both of those to be added to the list?
I would
as
like to
separate
have them
items?
clarified. I really, at first I thought maybe we're nitpicking. But if you're not going to be specific, and this policy hopefully will stand for a little while, but if you're not going to be specific, it's going to come back to bite us in 6 months.
And it's certainly important that everybody understand all the implications of all the details. So we'll come
Yep.
back, and council may not elect to change all of these things, but we'll certainly
They might
provide some
not.
consideration.
That's up to council. And 8.4, vending permit issues under this bylaw shall specify the food, beverages, and merchandise or services or combination thereof that the permit provides for. So if I've got a permit for a chip wagon, I'm not going to be able to sell sweaters or clothing for the same.
Are you suggesting that
Where?
that not be permitted, or just that the
Well,
clause be changed to
I'm
specify?
wondering if it needs to be clarified, CAO, so that that mistake is not made.
Well, as it stands right now, I don't believe that the bylaw would prohibit the selling of sweaters and hot dogs from the same vendor if that's what they applied for a permit to sell sweaters and hot dogs. So we'd
That's
have
right.
to investigate whether council would like to add a clause that separates that. And if so, a little more direction on what we're separating in terms of categories. Is it food service from everything else? I think you'll probably find that there are vendors that sell a little food and some other stuff, or vice versa.
Yeah, but if that should be reflected in the permit. That
Okay,
they're
so
going
it's just
to
that the
get.
permit be clearly
Accurate.
specifying all of the things
Yes,
that would be sold.
yes,
Okay,
that they're gonna
that's
do
simple
Ac-
enough.
Just accurate, yeah.
Okay, that was all that I picked up on for that one. Anyone else? Okay. So this
Maureen,
is
are you good with the list at this point? Do you need clarification on anything?
who, me?
No, I just want to make sure Maureen has it for
Oh,
the minute.
Maureen is, yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
I'm good.
I will send you my notes as well.
that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Everybody happy? We've already voted on the motion. The motion has amendments. The movers and seconders are happy with that. We'll see what happens when we get it to it again. Councillor Carver, do you have a comment?
I was
I
just
get-
trying to signal that I'm happy with that.
Hey, if you're happy, we're happy. All right.
Mayor Davini, did you just say we'd already voted? I think we were just voting to include all of this stuff in the motion. I don't know that we voted
Oh, I
on the
thought we
motion.
actually voted on the motion that Councillor Carver made. Okay, then you've heard the motion and all the rest of that diatribe. All in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go to the next one. Special events. Anybody have anything? Councillor Carver.
Yes, I would like to move that in item 2 of the special events draft bylaw, that it be slightly rephrased. So my motion is to change the wording to read that the purpose is to of the bylaw is to support the business, the purpose of the bylaw is to contribute to the viability of the business community instead, rather than contribute to the business community. So it's a very slight change, but I was troubled by leaving it at contributing to the business community. That was rather vague. So that's my motion to make that change.
Okay,
I second that.
okay, it's moved and seconded. Shall we talk about amendments? I'm curious, item number 3C. It talks about additional policing or traffic operational support. Who pays for that?
At this point, your worship, when we have extra support needed, that primarily we've had to lean on the RCMP, and that is something that has been included in our regular contract with the RCMP. However, Mahone Bay does lean a lot on the RCMP for our special events.
Okay.
I would note, though, that in the past, the RCMP used to make a great deal of use of auxiliary members, and that is not something that they have anymore. So one of the changes we've been seeing lately, if you look at the reindeer run for an example, they bring in, and part of their plan is to have traffic marshals, as does the soapbox derby. They have traffic marshals that are there, they're in place, they have a plan for what they will do, what their contingency plans are. And if they did not do that, then the question is who would do what, because we could not have vehicles driving into soapbox derbies. We could not have traffic incidents with people running, that sort of thing. So while we are lucky in our contract with the RCMP that they have been very good to us offering support, we really cannot depend on that, because if there's an accident on the highway or some sort of emergency, they do have to go, and they've been gracious with us. So that's also advice that we've received from our insurer, is that really somebody is paying for that. The town pays for that RCMP service. So that is something, as to say that everything is for an event is properly ready for what could happen and what's expected for part of the event. We really can't depend on the RCMP, and we really can't always plan on putting that off on the taxpayer if someone is bringing in a large event.
Okay, so there would be some provision for the person who is organizing the event to take on the responsibility for those incremental costs that the town could incur depending on what happens?
Depending on the event, and that would have to be a discussion. What would be required, what would be necessary? And if there are additional aspects that are needed, that would be something that the event organizers would have to make sure was taken care of.
Okay, CAO.
Yeah, I just want, I mean, that's very accurate. And I just wanted to add that that is sort of the overall approach here, is that notify the town in advance and substantiate that you have an ability to take care of those incremental costs or take care of the overload of town infrastructure. You know, it's also the same kind of thing that's going to lead to event organizers needing to ensure that they have additional outdoor washroom facilities for certain events, you know, additional parking. You know, that we wouldn't approve an event that says we're going to use the entire property the event's happening on, but we expect 200 attendants and there's nowhere to park in the neighborhood whatsoever, and we haven't made any plan whatsoever. So those type of things are in there to encourage the event organizer to think upfront about the additional impacts and costs. And town staff will certainly work with people if they're not aware of some of those options. We do have some early event organizers, and it's our intention to put together a bit of a guide. You know, did you think about this step? Have you gone ahead and making sure that you've done that, so it's not going to cause you a problem getting your permit?
Okay. Paragraph 4.4B is where that 30 business days shows up. So that's 6 weeks notice in order to get to 30 business days. Right?
Your worship, that was something that we had discussed. If you look at next week, there's a not a business day in the middle of the week. So we could end up with something, if someone wanted to plan something just after Easter, there's a 4-day weekend in there. So there are some, that was something that we had discussed, but we can certainly look at that again. And if you're looking for clarification on that or consistency.
No, I'm just thinking of, I mean, one of the drivers for this exercise was to simplify the process and to make it easy for people who want to organize events to know what to expect when they approach town hall. And I think something as basic as 30 working days, is that, how does that translate through to calendar days? If someone is trying to plan their work, it doesn't really clarify with what's written. Anyway, just a thought. The town is the property owner. So if somebody is scheduling an event that's going to involve alcohol, it is my understanding from past situations that as the property owner, the town is the one that has to sign off on the alcohol permit. Is that still the case? It is.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And that
Yeah,
point.
and, I mean, outside of a lease situation or some type of other legal agreement.
Okay. I think that's it for me. Yep.
And I just, as far as the business days thing, Mr. Mayor, I think it's very reasonable clarification because looking through, days are referenced another about 4 or 5 times. And in none of those cases does it clarify business or calendar.
Or calendar.
So for clarity, we definitely need to be consistent.
Yep. So those would be amendments to the motion that is on the floor. That staff will review those issues when they bring the package back at the next council meeting. Okay? All in favor? Motion's carried with the amendments. Councillor Carver, did you?
No, I was simply going to say that as the mover of the motion, I accepted the amendments.
We already, okay.
You're way ahead of me.
Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, if you'd indulge me, I was hoping that we could move the pride-related items from new business into council business or council items, in case there's a requirement to make a motion.
Okay, does anyone have any problem with that shift? Address the new business item now? Okay,
I don't, was the request to be addressed now? We still have 3 more staff reports.
Yeah, it can
I
be
thought he was asking.
at a later date, Mayor, whenever it's convenient within the council council items.
I think you should make it 7.3 Councillor Feeney Pride correspondence, and that way we've got it on the agenda.
Excellent.
Okay. Alternative, voting bylaw, 6.4.
So at the last meeting, council actually gave first reading to an alternative voting bylaw. We had a long period of notice, a little bit longer than normal, just based on the timeline of the advertisements and the meetings. So we still have a couple of weeks' time, which would meet the requirement, especially with a non-substantive change. Now, this change is minor, but it is somewhat significant. So essentially, staff caught an issue with respect to the French school board elections, which still take place. And also there was another clarification requested, which I would describe as a non-substantive clarification. They're both in the report. Our recommendation is that it would be appropriate to make those changes to the bylaw that has already received first reading, and that there is sufficient time to ensure that the draft of the bylaw that is available for the public to review prior to the hearing is the new version with these changes. Council could give first reading again now. We still have time to properly advertise, except we've already posted the advertisements and they already refer to the previous first reading date. So if council's agreeable, we have a motion there to amend the bylaw that is being presented for second reading July 14th.
Okay. What is your wish, council? You have a proposed, Councillor Carver?
I was waiting for somebody else to jump in.
Beat me to it.
So I'll move the council approve the minor amendments to the draft alternative voting bylaw as given first reading on June 9th, 2020.
I'll second that.
Councillor Bain will second that. All in favor? That motion's carried. Okay. Let's go to the beautification and streetscape application.
So this one's coming back on council's agenda. It hasn't actually been long since it was last reported on. We had a report on it last month, but at that time, council directed us to reach into the chamber with respect to the wayfinding component here. And as a result, we did have an initial project meeting with the chamber, and I've attached the notes here, and came back with the same recommendation, now substantiated by the chamber's commitment of $5,000 and to a timeline as presented. So any questions? And then this was the original recommendation, but it's still the recommendation.
Mayor, I'd move the
Councillor
council.
Green.
Mayor, I'd move the council direct staff to apply to the 2020 beautification and streetscaping program for Edgewater Street beautification and wayfinding signage project.
Seconded.
Okay, seconded by Councillor O'Neill. On the question? All in favor? Motion's carried. Okay. And the transportation project is the final one.
Council had a special meeting on June 11th, which was scheduled to discuss the 2020-21 transportation project. We had a great discussion. A number of items were identified. I tried to capture the ones that I had heard receive majority consensus from council, presented some draft recommendations on that basis. The recommendations, which are an entire page long here, and I'll put them up on the screen, they don't have to be made as a single motion by any means. Each of them can be made individually. And also whoever wants to make the motion with regards to developing the 2020-21 transportation project, which is the second one, which lists the different items, feel free to do what you guys just did with respect to pausing to see if a friendly amendment to add or change one of those items would be agreeable. This is council's list. So that being said, if there's any questions, I've got it up on the screen. Happy to help.
Okay. What is your wish, Councillor Fahey?
Mayor, I think that is an accurate reflection of our previous meeting and kind of outlines the priorities of council. My question really was around the referral to the Asset Management Committee as holding the mandate for, future evaluations. Is that the body, that committee, the body that would review these transportation related activities? It wasn't clear to me that that was the right place to send it, but I don't necessarily have an alternative that's superior to that, so I can live with it. I just thought that might be worthy of conversation. But other than that, I think certainly prepared to move this item forward.
I guess that depends whether or not you consider transportation to be an asset of the town, as opposed to what we use to support the transportation.
I would have thought it more of a traffic authority type item. And I know we don't have a traffic authority committee per se, but we do have a traffic authority in the form of the CAO.
Mr. Hyde, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just with respect to that being a traffic authority item, I'm always around, of course, and so are the engineers that we can contract to tell us which things are safe or appropriate. But I think the largest part now in terms of asset management planning around transportation is reconciling the $20 million of transportation infrastructure we currently own with the suggestions for any kind of significant new investments, because maintaining the existing infrastructure is a key priority. So where the asset management committee, in my view, comes in is that, they will recommend back to council, principles like when we are replacing a piece of infrastructure, we should consider whether active transportation is facilitated in addition to vehicular transportation. So when we go ahead and do a strip of road repaving, staff would present the council an expectation for the project on that basis. So I would never expect that the committee would consider a particular project per se, but that the committee would consider council policy approaches that would then inform staff presenting future recommendations to council. So I know that's a little abstract, but that's why I presented the motion the way that I did. At the end of the day, as the management committee is an advisory committee, so they are only providing recommendations to council.
Okay. One of the things, and I just already mentioned this to the CAO, that I felt we had a good discussion on was the need for a crosswalk to town hall. People cannot get to town hall to do their town business when town hall is open unless they walk in the street. There's no sidewalk and crosswalk to get there. And I felt we had also discussed a crosswalk somewhere around Amos Pewter that would give people the possibility in the middle of the block between Pleasant and Main and Fairmont and Main to cross the street. Right now they can't. So I was rather disappointed to see that on that list, which is very complete and I think hits all the key points, but misses those two, Town Hall and something across Main Street. Deputy Mayor?
I think that's where the Department of Transportation is gonna have to come in and tell us if infrastructure, if we can do those crosswalks or not. Because years ago, there was a formula that crosswalks went from corner to corner.
Corner to corner.
You just can't, but there's no corner to get to Amos Pewter's. There's no corner to get to Town Hall. So I think we have to wait for that report. I mean, I think staff could ask that question. And then we proceed from there. If they say, sure, put it there. But I mean, if we're putting a crosswalk at Cherry Lane, crosswalk here, and a crosswalk at the medical center, I don't think they're gonna approve all three in that short a distance. So anyway, I think we have to wait till they come back with that. And that could be a question that staff could ask Department of Transportation and Infrastructure.
But there is no corner at the medical center, nor is there a corner at the Lutheran church.
And I think that's where we have to get the advice from the Department of Transportation.
CAO?
The deputy mayor says the next thing down on the list here at the bottom of the page is the motion to seek their input on that. So I would say that if council agrees to adding other potential crosswalk locations on this list, that you're only adding them to the project concept to be discussed with TIR. So there wouldn't be any problem there. The reason that I hadn't heard consensus on those two locations, and I'll just, I guess, point out so the council, if you do go ahead and add them when somebody makes the motion, will consider. In the case of the town hall, because of the way that the island is set up for the town hall, there would have to be changes to that island. Like the crosswalk couldn't end at one of the entryways, so it can only end at the island. And that setup is a planted, I think has some effort has gone into landscaping that. And I think we lose that, which I'm not objecting to. It's not my prerogative. But just so the council would understand, I think that's one of the things that would have to be sorted out to come to that. And CBCL's recommendation was removing that island. They recommended removing that island. So that's just something to consider in terms of exploring that crosswalk further. And in terms of the Amos Pewter location, I know council did talk about the fact that there's a long gap without crossings, but I believe there was some discussion around lines of sight and where the appropriate placement would be. And I didn't feel that there was a clear determination there, but if there is and council approves it, then certainly we can add it to the list. And this isn't the final go ahead. This is a list that can then be shopped around for money and transportation approval.
Councillor Carver?
Yeah, I would support adding a crosswalk at Town Hall to the list because it doesn't represent to me any commitment at all, but at least it's on the list and we could get the feedback from the department on that.
Okay. Anyone else?
Doesn't hurt to get their opinion on where we can put them. They can only say no.
Okay. Do we have a motion on the floor?
No, we
I
don't.
don't think we
So
do.
whoever makes the motion can just add that when they do.
All right.
Mayor, would you prefer one motion or would you like 4 individual
motion.
motions?
One giant wrapped up ribbon bow on it motion.
Well, with your indulgence, how would I move that council accept the CBCL limited transportation plan report that was presented on May 12, 2020, and refer that report to the, I think we're past it. The council directs staff to, supported by the CBCL Limited, to develop the 2020 transportation plan, including the three-way stop and clear away, Main Street intersection, the new pedestrian crosswalks at the medical center, the Cherry Lane, Lutheran Church, Ketty's Landing, and the Mahone Bay Town Hall on Main Street, improved trail crossing at Long Hill Road, Main Street intersection, new traffic calming measures on Claremont Street and Kinburn Street, changing Cherry Lane to one-way and Orchard Street to one-way to Parish Street, with Parish Street serving as the exit for both. It also moved that a proposed Connect 2 program application be submitted and public consideration of that, well, I don't know if that's right, and public consideration of that meeting on July 14th, 2020. But also move the council direct staff to contact the Nova Scotia Department of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal Program, renewal regarding the town's proposed 2020-2021 transportation project, as well as discuss proposed changes on the highway approaches to Mahone Bay as outlined in the CBCL report. Also move the council direct staff to contact the Nova Scotia Liquor Commission regarding the proposed bike corridor across their property, referenced in the CBCL report, connecting Main Street and Kinburn Street and supporting the establishment of a community-wide all ages bicycle road. And not to be forgotten, the council directs staff to contact the Mahone Bay Legion. I don't think we want to have that in the motion, do we?
Or is that a separate motion?
Well, let's move on. What else do we have in the motion, Dylan, if you could scroll down?
I believe that is the end of the motion.
Okay.
So
Well, with
I'll let you see if you can finish your motion.
I'm prepared to make the motion up until the end of the penultimate paragraph.
The penultimate paragraph.
Richard, were you seconding or asking a question?
I'll second it.
Oh, Penny seconded it. If we're in discussion, I have something I wanted to add.
Okay, go ahead. So, did you have a comment, Mr. Hyde?
Yes, if I may, I just wanted to clarify from Councillor Feeney where it started and ended, and it may help everybody as well. So Joe, I assume that the only intentional deviation aside from the start and end was to add the town hall crosswalk onto the list of crosswalks. And when you were starting, you started up at the top of the motion. Did you mean to start with the top of the motion and go all the way to where we stopped down on the Legion? Do you want me to say we start at the beginning of that council? Or did you mean to leave that first paragraph out of your motion?
No, I didn't, Dylan. I think I just got,
Okay.
my computer just got cut off the top, so.
So everything here starting at the top at that council, but then at the bottom, you just wanted to end at the word Legion? Or in response to their letter?
At the end of bicycle route.
Okay, so nothing on the last paragraph. All right, so that's
Nothing
clear.
on the Legion.
Thank you.
So is everyone clear what the motion is? Councillor Carver?
Yes, I'm clear on what the motion is. I just want to add a comment that I realized when Councillor Feeney was reading through that, I was visualizing the traffic around the Cherry Lane, Orchard Street, Parish Street, and the traffic then all disgorging out of Parish Street onto Edgewater, adding to the already pretty intense confusion that exists there with the service station and Tim Hortons there. That's all. Going to be add confusion there.
And in fact, I think Councillor Carver, TIR may make the same observation and suggest that it may not be a good idea. Councillor Now?
Could we, on that one with the Cherry Lane Orchard, could we make that just up to behind the town, behind the tea brewery and make that road rather than going all the way up to Parish?
Well, that distinction there was an intentional distinction around the access to the Cenotaph intersection on Main. So the original request was just to make Cherry Lane and Parish one way as far as the intersection with Orchard. But then changing the indirection of traffic on Orchard was a secondary suggestion. So they're two different suggestions that compound to have traffic only going out at on Parish. I think there's a lot of value to the suggestion not to have out traffic coming out at the tea brewery. It is probably one thing we could do to improve the safety of that intersection, especially with the pedestrian crossing there. But they could be separated.
Because I think, Richard, what you're suggesting is that traffic is going to go in on Cherry and in on Orchard, and then they're both going to have to cycle out through Parish Street.
Yeah, but if
Down
we only
past
made
the-
it one way from where the road that goes up past the town hall in behind the tea brewery there, we only made it one way from there to Main, then that would cut off the exit onto Main by the tea brewery, but it would also leave that other section there so that they could exit up by the town hall or wherever.
Well, that's a scary one, Richard. You're going to have everyone exiting through our parking lot. I'd much rather they actually be on a road.
Yeah.
I'm already concerned we're going to have everyone wanting to exit from our parking lot.
Well, perhaps we should see what the professionals, what their advice is, the TIR people.
Leave it this way and see where it ends up.
All right. All
So
right.
the motions, I'm clear on the motion. I think Maureen
Okay.
is.
All right. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Okay.
And just a prompt, I guess I'm going to prompt just to make sure that if we leave this, anyone else is free to jump in and make a motion with respect to Legion. Otherwise, I will not reach out to Legion in this regard.
Councillor Carver? I think you're on mute, Councillor. Are you? Does anyone else hear Councillor Carver?
No.
No?
He's on mute.
Okay, thank you. She's happy. Okay. Let's go back to our agenda. That's the transportation project. COVID-19. Ha. The list is getting shorter. Oh, you're back.
I'm sorry, I did that thing where the screen disappeared. I'm just a little concerned if we don't deal with the Legion. They've written us a letter. We need to reply in some way. Do we not?
I agree.
I think they'll be happy with no response from honestly.
I would suggest that we reply in some way that indicates that the town is not considering that possibility at this time. I'm just throwing ideas out, but I do think that we need to reply to their letter.
I think rather than say we're not intending to, their letter I felt was asking that we would engage and involve the Legion in any issues around the cenotaph. And I think we could quite legitimately give them that assurance that we would not do anything without consulting them, but we would not commit ourselves one way or the other at this point. Beyond that, to engage them. Councillor O'Neill?
That was my hope as well, Mayor. I have had a couple of conversations just around town, and I know that I have the strong sense that letter would be appreciated. And so I move that we send a letter to the Legion to that effect, and I think the Mayor articulated it very well.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Now. Councillor Feeney, comment?
I'd like the letter to come back for council to review before it was sent out. to ensure kind of council's alignment with the tone of the note.
Okay,
Just for clarity, then, usually that would mean that you would want to wait till the next council meeting to send that out because council would be reviewing it. Is it all right to just say that council members would get a look at it, or do we actually need council to review it?
could we not ship it around electronically for,
It's just a distinction that we
So-
make legally between council members and council. So I'm just asking Joe, is it good enough for council members to look at it? Or does council need to look at it, which would mean looking at it at our next meeting?
Well, I'm comfortable with reviewing it by email in the context of getting it out in a timely manner.
okay. So we have a motion moved and seconded. We're going to respond to RCL, giving them our assurance that we will be consulting, engaging them in anything to do with the cenotaph. The letter will come back to council members individually in an electronic format for review and comment. All in favor? Motion's carried. Okay, let's go back to the COVID. July 3rd, as you are all very well aware, is the big day that the Atlantic bubble opens. Still no word yet on what the details will be around dealing with people from other parts of Canada who are coming through one of the provinces in the Atlantic bubble. I still hear horror stories that people from the US are coming through Quebec and they're coming into New Brunswick and they're not being challenged at the border. They're giving a pamphlet about self-isolation. And then the next story I hear is how the RCMP went to a woman's house to ensure that she was self-isolating and came back the next day to ensure that her children were self-isolating. And I was talking to a member of the RCMP who said there are many stories and variations going around as there are visitors. But today the federal government said no reservation that the RCMP will be following up on citizens, people coming into the country who are required to self-isolate, and that the fee structure, the fine structure, would be very heavily enforced. So, the clerk, do you want to talk about your notice that's going out to the citizens?
Certainly. Sorry,
Yeah, Mo, are you okay to speak to that? Essentially, staff have been working to update our messaging this week, and Maureen circulated the most recent draft.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is something that we plan to send out in a mail drop. The last time we sent anything out to the community specifically only about COVID was at the end of March. So we're looking at an update, and as the CAO noted, it was circulated to council this afternoon, and our plan would be to put that out as a mail drop. We would also update the signage on the front of town hall, put it on social media and the website and that sort of thing.
Okay. Thank you. Day 15, no new cases in Nova Scotia. 5,500 cases overnight Tuesday night in the state of Florida. So be glad you're here. We're not there. I spoke with Jeff Phillips at the chamber, and he is guardedly optimistic that things are on the mend in Mahone Bay. He did comment about one business that is closing. The Here Nor There shop is closing, but they were planning to close when the COVID thing was just getting started. But the Noisy Crow has opened. So you win one, you lose one. And the general feeling is that, if they can get opened up, if they can get the Atlantic bubble going, they can salvage something of this tourist season. So that's about all there is that you would not already know about. Councillor O'Neill,
If I may, I would just like to make a
I
comment.
can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Okay,
Uh,
I think it's on my end that the problem
Okay.
is.
yeah, I think so. Can you hear me now? Does everyone else hear me? Thumbs up.
Is it
Mayor?
on my end?
It
Okay,
is,
you
yeah.
got it.
Okay.
All right.
So I would just like to make a comment, if I may, about the communication that's going out.
Not hearing a
And
thing.
I'd like to take some guidance from
Okay.
the CAO if the mayor can't hear me. Can you hear me now?
I can. Sorry
great.
about that.
That's okay. So I was just looking at the communication, and I think at a glance, it's an attractive communication. It's very clear and succinctly written. Every image in the communication is a male image, and I particularly dislike the two green male figures that look a little alien-like. So I just wanted to give that feedback. Even the person depicted in the playground, which I would expect to be a child, is some old guy with a beard. So I would really like to encourage a second look prior to that going out.
Okay.
I can definitely take a look at that. And I certainly did not notice that the person in a playground was an older person.
Do you want me
Yes,
to?
so we'll take another look at that.
Yeah. Do you want me to put that up, or are we all good on? Yeah, I certainly didn't notice the person in the playground was an older
Like the
person
friendly
either.
giant there.
Interesting way to look at that. Yeah.
It really
Uh,
is, because I actually took a really good close look to see, was that person like a scary orange? And I didn't notice that was a male figure. So yes, I'll take a look at that.
I think it's, yeah, I would, I'm looking at it now. I can put it up on the screen if you guys want, but I think it's just teeth and not facial hair.
You think it's what?
Here, I'll show you what I'm talking about.
It's
There we
teeth,
go.
I think.
Yeah, we can all see it now.
That's his smile, not a mustache.
So
And
that's the
unfortunately, the
playground.
pool will not open in 2020.
It still doesn't look like a child, any child that I know. And really, if you scroll through the images, I mean, I think that I don't think I'm wrong that they're all men in the images. So
Yeah, if we can find a child's image, it might be. But I did get a couple of phone calls yesterday, one from citizens expressing their concern at the loss of the swimming pool for the season, but appreciated why and the difficulties with trying to put something like that together at this late date. So, okay. Any questions? Then let's go to Councillor Carver's tree management.
Thank you very much. So I submitted a notice of motion, and when I began to try to get my head around all the issues, I decided that it was clearest to put forth the ideas as 3 separate motions. So as a bit of background, one of the appeals of Mahone Bay when I moved here in 2004 was the look of the town, the heritage buildings, the winding streets, and lovely trees. There were trees everywhere, lining the streets and flourishing in yards and thriving in the Jubilee Woods. Soon after I was elected in 2012, I received a call from a citizen who was concerned about trees being cut down in the street right of way at a new construction site. And subsequently, I noticed more and more street trees being cut to the ground, or topped in an ugly and damaging manner, or failing from neglect. And some of this was the responsibility of the town. I was concerned and discovered that others were worried as well. In 2016, Valerie Herder and I brought our concerns to the Bylaw and Policy Review Committee. There was a lively discussion about the value of trees. They cool the air, their shade increases pavement longevity. They prevent erosion and reduce the load on stormwater drains by absorbing water. They're beneficial for mental health. They act as a carbon sink. They reduce noise. They improve property values. There was tacit support then for the idea that staff might be trained in good or urban forestry practices, and a sense that trees are a feature of importance in the town. So unfortunately, that energy dissipated and was not rekindled in 2018, until 2018, when the Talking Trees group initiated the 100 Trees, 100 Years project in collaboration with the town. So it is the impetus of Talking Trees and the collaboration of town and community on the 100 Trees project, the interest from Bayview Community School, the support of the Three Churches Foundation and other community groups, and the expressed concerns of private citizens that prompt me to bring these 3 resolutions to council. So I'd like to present the 3 motions in a different order from the way they appeared in the agenda. So I'd like to start with the best practices motion. Whereas in May 2016, a summary notation of a meeting of the Town of Mahone Bay Bylaw and Policy Working Group advised that town staff will be attending a tree maintenance session hosted by the Town of Bridgewater. And whereas the planned tree maintenance session did not take place, and whereas in recent years, several residents, as well as a visiting urban forestry expert, have commented with concern about damage to trees caused by improper cutting. And whereas the Town of Mahone Bay supports the value and importance of its natural assets through its planning and strategy documents and its streets and sidewalks bylaw, number 41, June 2008. And whereas municipal green assets and infrastructure should be treated with the same intentional management, maintenance, and replacement planning as its gray infrastructure. And whereas trees are the only piece of infrastructure that increases value over time. A quotation from John Simmons, the Halifax urban forester. Therefore, be it resolved that council direct staff to arrange training in urban forestry best practices as soon as possible for all relevant town employees, and further to ensure that any contractors engaged to trim town trees are properly qualified in urban forestry best practices.
Do you have a second? No, this is not a motion, is it? This is notice of motion.
No,
That was a motion. That was a motion. I gave notice of motion at the last meeting.
That you were going to do this one? Okay. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Feeney seconds it. CIO?
There's a number of things in here which direct staff to do things which have some financial implications that haven't been defined. I'm wondering if Councillor Carver and Councillor Feeney would consider, and if not, perhaps we'll just see how this motion goes, rephrasing a motion similar to the one about Peter Dunker, wherein staff would be asked to investigate the potential for and cost of doing the things that are cited in the original motion, as opposed to just directing them to be done where we don't have that information.
Councillor O'Neill?
I'm inclined, and I understand your position, CAO, but I'm inclined to support the motion for training, being that the requirement for training has been already identified. A training was identified and not taken, and it has been a concern of mine since joining council that there has not been, I think, appropriate funds set aside for training for staff as in any of the budgets that I've seen. And I feel that because trees are such an important asset to the town, that you know, that a training ought to be mandatory, and that anyone whose job description it is to cut down trees should have some formal training in doing that.
Okay, Councillor Bain.
Yeah, I'll only support that if there is some financial statement put in there to pursue what this may cost, all the training programs and that sort of thing. And further to that, there are dead trees that should be removed.
Yeah.
Particularly between the Pharmasave along the brook to, I guess we'll just call it Bob's building there. There's a dozen dead trees. I'd requested they be removed because if they're diseased, they could infect other trees. So it's not just about pruning and planting, it's also about removal at appropriate times.
Okay. CAO?
Both good points, John. And I just, to Councillor O'Neill, I think that you might have misunderstood my perspective in terms of the costs and what you're trying to achieve. We do have staff training budgets, but if council were to pass this motion as it's been presented with no discussion of costs, I'm then using the existing staff training budgets to balance this against other training needs. And it very well may be that that results in either no training for trees or only training for trees. And I feel that it would be better to put that in context in a report to council.
That's fair. That's acceptable. Thank you. May I make one other comment about the motion itself and request a revision to a whereas?
Go ahead.
The only one that strikes me is potentially not being required is the quote that trees are the only piece of infrastructure that increases value over time. I feel that we would actually have to know that for sure and really give that some thought before declaring that as a whereas, which is meant to indicate a truth that from which a conclusion can be drawn and an action taken. So I would request a friendly amendment that whereas be struck.
Okay.
Although it's only really verifying the truth that it was spoken by that individual because it was included as a quotation.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Carver, are you willing to remove that whereas?
I would prefer to keep it.
Okay,
That whereas it reads, essentially it says, whereas.
so we'll take that as an amendment.
No,
No, we'll take it as an amendment and then we'll have council vote on the amendment and then vote on the original motion.
what amendment are you referring to?
If it becomes a hostile amendment, Penny, if Colleen still wants council to vote on it, she can request that council vote on it as a
Colleen
hostile.
wants
I
that
see.
amendment to be considered by council, then they vote on the amendment and then they vote on your original motion.
Yeah, so my preference is, and it's unfortunate that this is called a hostile amendment because it's not at all how I'm feeling
That's
about
his
it.
word.
I
That's
know.
the CAO's word.
How I am feeling about it is that it seems to declare a fact that I don't particularly feel in agreement with and haven't had time to philosophically consider. And I think anybody reading this, may find themselves in the same boat. So I would like to vote on amending that.
Okay. All right, anyone else want to comment?
So Mayor, just to clarify, there's two amendments to Councilor Carver's motion. One
Yeah, I
being,
wanted to clarify that too. Councillor Carver, did you accept as a friendly amendment the change that the motion would now direct staff to come back and report on doing the things that you'd requested? Was that something that you had accepted before Colleen's request?
Yes, that staff would
Okay.
prepare a report on the cost of doing such training. I would like to retain the sense of importance and commitment to doing the training.
Okay, let's
So then
eliminate.
after that,
No more
after that
talking
was
about
accepted as a
amendment,
friendly
please.
amendment, then there's
Councillor
another.
Bain?
Yeah, well, I'll repeat myself. I'll only support it if it's noted that there's dead trees that should be removed, that in a windstorm could fall over on a car, and we just
Okay.
might be in for big costs.
Councillor Carver, do you want to comment?
Well, I don't see that dead trees have anything to do with this particular motion, so I'm just not quite sure where that's going. This is about training, not about removing dead trees.
And I should think the training would enable staff to identify the trees that are dead.
I agree.
Yeah, it says forest mastery best practices,
Okay.
so I think that's all inclusive.
Yes.
So first, on the amendment to eliminate the whereas that mentions the quote from the author at coast.ca.
Who seconded that? Colleen made the motion. Councillor O'Neill made the motion. Who
It's not a
seconded it?
motion, it's an amendment. Do we have a Deputy Mayor has
Let's get this
seconded.
going.
All in favor of the amendment? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The amendment is carried. That statement is deleted from the motion. We now have the motion intact except for that one statement that we've eliminated. All in favor of the original motion? 2, 3, 4. Motion's carried. Okay. Okay. 7.3, Councillor Feeney, the pride issue.
There's more. There's more.
Pardon me, Mayor. I believe Councillor Carver has 2 other items on the agenda.
So the second motion has to do with establishing a committee in the town. So whereas the Town Tree Committee, as described in the 1985 Tree Committee bylaw, is composed of all 7 members of council to the exclusion of representation by other members of the community. And whereas the town has established an asset management committee to advise on the planning and management of town assets. And whereas the town's green infrastructure is considered to be a municipal asset. And whereas the town values the participation of citizens in advising on recommendations to council, and most recently has collaborated with the Talking Trees Community Group on the highly successful 100 Trees, 100 Years project. Therefore, be it resolved that council direct staff to prepare a report on the possibility of creating a tree subcommittee composed of citizens and members of council as part of the Asset Management Committee.
Comment? Seconder. We got a seconder. Councillor Feeney seconds. On the question. No one? Okay.
I can only comment to say that trees absolutely are a natural asset, and I can produce this report if directed.
Is there not a plan to include the trees in the town in the asset management?
The asset management
issues?
policy that council adopted back in January did specifically cite natural assets. So it is already identified in a policy of council as one of the assets to be considered in our asset management planning. That being said, I don't think that's incompatible with the motion on the floor.
Okay. Anyone else? All in favor? 1, 2, 3. Motion is defeated. Did you have another one, Councillor Carver?
May I ask, excuse me, on that vote, did you vote on that, Mayor?
I voted against it.
Okay, thank you.
I think the asset management actually is going to be staged to deal with that asset issue and would certainly engage groups like the Talking Trees group when the issue is evaluated for the purposes of the asset management committee. However, that was why I voted against it. Councillor Carver.
So the third motion has to do with creating a new, updating the town tree bylaw. So whereas in May and June 2016, the Town Bylaw and Policy Review Working Group expressed its intention to hold discussions about reviewing and updating the 1985 Tree Committee bylaw. And whereas there don't seem to be any records and documents or minutes as to whether such discussions took place. And whereas the 1985 Tree Committee bylaw no longer serves the current needs of the town. And whereas the town of Mahone Bay is embarking on a comprehensive review of its municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw to take place in 2020-21, whereby town values and priorities will be updated. Therefore, be it resolved that council direct staff to prepare a report on optimal timelines for drafting a new tree bylaw in the context of the municipal plan review process.
Okay. I'm a little unclear about what what your motion is asking for, Councillor Carver.
I'm asking that the town create a new updated trees bylaw, and that in considering that process, it might be complicated given that there is a municipal plan review coming up. So I was asking for staff to create a recommendation as to the best timing for creating and updating the trees bylaw.
Okay. Do we have a seconder? Councillor O'Neill seconds.
I second that. And Mayor, I'd like to say, I think that this sounds reasonable to me. I'm not familiar with the trees bylaw and from 1985, I guess. And it would seem to me that, you know, we're updating an awful lot of our bylaws, ones that, you know, have needed a little bit of a polish. And I think that this, if I'm reading this correctly and understanding this correctly, it's really just asking staff for a very small report to provide some clarity on what the timing, what appropriate would timing of the timing of that bylaw review would be, given the planning work that we're doing. And I feel that this is very reasonable.
Okay. Councillor Feeney.
And Mayor, I'm unaware of the nuances of the historical tree bylaw, but it's probably worth our while to revisit, you know, a bylaw like that every 30 or 40 years or so. And actually having that, you know, updated tool in the toolbox might allow the town to deal with some of the issues that Councillor Bain mentioned earlier. So I think it seems like it's a worthwhile exercise. I don't think it's incredibly time sensitive, but, you know, to put it on the agenda, move that forward for review in a, you know, over the next calendar year strikes me as a reasonable thing to do.
Okay. Anyone else? Deputy Mayor, no? Nope. Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Councillor Carver? Another, perhaps?
No, I said 3 and that was 3.
Okay. I don't have them 3 on my list. I know you've got a couple in the Heritage Advisory Committee. No, but before we do that, we're going to talk 7.3, the pride issue.
That's right. Mayor, I think the deputy clerk has a few items that came to council's attention, late breaking news earlier today. And maybe she can speak to them specifically about a request around the pride flag and a second request around the painting of a sidewalk with the pride colors. So maybe I'll pass it over to Maureen to talk to council about that.
Sure. So we received a request for to fly the pride flag on our community flagpole. That is policy, our flag flying policy passed in February. So we received our first application for that. We have to get, we tried to install the community pole that was donated, and we need to get some replacement stuff. So it can't go up right now anyway. But if a community group is interested in doing this, we thought that we would get this information to council in case they felt that it was a time sensitive matter, because of course a community organization would want to know if there were plans to do that. Just after receiving that request, I also received an email asking if the town would consider painting rainbow crosswalks also from Lunenburg Pride. We said we would, follow up with her. And shortly after that, we received another request from a town resident asking about rainbow crosswalks. And I will say that second request about the crosswalks, we have received that. We've been asked about that from that person and others in town over the years. So we put it all together for council's consideration. And I think the CAO may actually be able to shed some light on the crosswalk issue.
And just before commenting on the crosswalk issue with respect to the flag request, I just wanted to clarify, as Mo said, we don't have the flagpole up right now. Should be up within about a week to 2 weeks time. So essentially, if council were inclined to grant this request, the request would be phrased as contingent on when the pole is ready, you can have flag raising. And with respect to the crosswalk, I can comment on that now, or we want to talk about them as two separate issues. Mr. Mayor, I do have a lot possibly to say about the crosswalk from a traffic authority perspective.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that last bit, CAO.
Oh, I just wondered if you wanted me to launch into discussion of the crosswalk or if we wanted to deal with the flag flying request first.
Now let's talk about the crosswalk.
Sure. So my understanding of the request is just to have, one or more crosswalks. That it's not for a specific location. As traffic authority in Shelburne, we did put in a pride crosswalk a number of years back. One of the main guidelines there is the use of zebra crossings. So as councillors would be aware, we do have an intention on certain high profile, high visibility crossings to move with the current line painting contract to do a few zebra crossings. So that's actually going to be taking place beginning next week, the new line painting. With the zebra crossings in locations, if you paint the zebra crossings, it's necessary to add 2 outer white lines that just go on the outside of the zebra stripes. But beyond that, you are permitted to paint within them. The paints are, special, obviously, like road paints, and the treatment is usually would be applied by professionals. So from traffic authority perspective, I think the key thing is selecting, if council's willing, a crossing that has good visibility and where the paint would not present a distraction. So I do have a suggestion of a particular crosswalk, the discussion that Derek and I have had and looking at different ones and the angle of approach and everything. If council is interested in that recommendation. But I would say as traffic authority, I don't see a safety concern as long as the crosswalk is properly selected. And then as far as the logistics, we would have to contract for the painting. So it might also take a couple of weeks.
Good. Councillor O'Neill.
I like rainbow crossings. I think that they are lively looking. They certainly give the sense that the place you're at is inclusive and supportive. What I don't like about rainbow crossings is after a little while, they start to look really tawdry, and then the town is left with something that they have to either maintain or fix up or get rid of. And I just wondered if there was any thought given to how long the crossing would be up, and would there be any cost associated with making sure it didn't look tawdry after a small period of time?
CAO.
The only real proof is going to be in the pudding once it's out. But in, I think, 5 years now, approximately, the one in Shelburne, it's only been repainted once a year and it's held up very, very well. Traffic volumes on that street in Shelburne are comparable to the traffic volumes on our main street. So in that sense, have reason to believe it will hold up well. That being said, you never really know about any treatment in any location, and it does depend on how it's applied. I've seen them applied in other communities where I've been traveling and looked at them and looked at how they're peeling. And there were some differences in the methods of application that I could see. So it is probably down to doing it right and then observing the volume and the nature of the traffic at the location. It may require painting out rather than allowing it to fade, because obviously if it fades to a discoloration, it's difficult to see. Legally speaking, the outer white lines constitute a sidewalk or crosswalk regardless of whether there is any zebra stripe visible. But that being said, for safety reasons, once we observe it, we could take the attitude of painting to white in the fall, which is one additional painting each year in white.
Okay. Councillor now.
Yeah, Dylan, I just want to clarify, with the white lines outside, that's what makes it a legal crosswalk? Because I thought here a few years ago when they did that in the city that the colored sidewalks, at least colored crosswalks rather, were deemed illegal. So by putting the white lines on the outside, that makes it legal?
Yeah, that was the difficulty, is that it's actually the white lines that constitute a crosswalk in that case, and whatever's inside them doesn't change that as being constituted as a crosswalk, because the TAC standard for a crosswalk is it can be constituted by 2 horizontal white bars of a certain dimension.
Okay, Councillor Carver?
In relation to, I have a concern in relation to safety and the texture of the paint and becoming slippery when it's wet. And I know there has been at least one fall caused by slippery wet, the depression, the depression painting. So what assurance do we have that that very solid layer of paint then is not going to be slippery?
Well, I can say that we studied this when we put them in Shelburne. I'm sure it's been looked at in a lot of places with zebra crossings. It doesn't have anything to do with the pride crossing. It's just a zebra painting technique, and they've become dominant. They're recommended by TAC. The example you're giving, I would suggest, has more to do with painting on an uneven surface, which is not recommended by TAC, and which we do with the depression painting. But in this case, I don't think there's a concern around safety from that. They're commonly used everywhere.
Okay, Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, does staff have a recommended site for the colored crosswalk in mind now that they can share with council, or would you prefer to continue your due diligence on that front?
I do have a recommendation. I just wanted to ensure that council was inclined to hear one. Otherwise, there's no need to present it.
I'd appreciate hearing the recommendation, Mayor, if you're so inclined.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So of the existing crosswalks, the one that we were considering was the Main Street crossing at Pleasant. It provides a high level of visibility without other intersection distractions. It's very well visible crosswalk as it stands, so I don't think there'd be any diminishment of the visibility of the crosswalk by doing this painting treatment.
Okay.
Is that the one that goes across Main Street to the Independent, or is it the one that goes directly across Pleasant?
On Main.
The one from the shoe store to the independent grocery store. Deputy Mayor?
I'd like to make that a motion, Your Worship, that crosswalk be painted with pride colors.
Okay, and would you like to add to that we will authorize the flag to the flagpole when it's erected?
Sure.
Okay. Councillor now seconds. We have a motion to paint the crosswalk and to fly the flag. All in favor? Motion's carried. Good one. Okay, I will note that it's 9:03, so we're gonna turn it up. Heritage Advisory Committee, we have the draft minutes of the June 10th, 2020 meeting. And there are 2 motions within that, or 2 issues within that.
There are, Mayor. Just let me bring up the agenda here.
Yeah.
I can speak to that with some speed.
And if anyone does want during these for me to put them up, I can as well.
Sure, Dylan, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
Just having trouble toggling back and forth tonight.
Oh. There you go.
Excellent. So, as you all know, last year in 2019, we started and implemented the Heritage Grant Application Program. And we had a successful participant in that program a year ago, and we have a second Heritage application grant from the owners of 97 Edgewater Street. There's some information in your package regarding their heritage property and their request for the grant in the amount of $500 to help them with repairs to the street-facing exterior. So the Heritage Advisory Committee is recommending, and I would move tonight the council approve that the Heritage Grant application from the owners of 97 Edgewater Street be granted.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councillor Carver. On the question. All in favor? Motion's carried.
Excellent. There's one more.
Councillor Feeney, the second one?
Second one, Mayor. The HAC had a wide-ranging conversation regarding the ongoing preservation of what's now kind of colloquially known as the aquatic gardens, which is also known as, the Lily Pond and a few other names, as you all know. But this is specifically the property that is kind of behind the old John Bain home, as how I would know it. But in an area that has an underappreciated yet significant historical connection with the development of the town. And one that I think, through improved interpretation and signage down the road will probably be given its just due. But at the HAC, there was a recommendation to council to direct staff to explore options to protect the aquatic gardens from future development. And I think obviously that is an outcome of one of the ideas that sprang out of the CBCL report. So, even in the CBCL report, of course, they were quite forthcoming in saying, their recommendations certainly aren't necessarily always made up from analysis of key historical impacts. But obviously the HAC has that mandate. So the HAC would have make this recommendation to council, and therefore I'd move that council direct staff to explore options to protect the aquatic gardens from future development, as well as the possibility of developing or installing interpretive signage.
Okay.
Seconded.
Councillor Carver seconds. You've heard the motion on the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. Let's go to the Economic Development Committee.
Here we had our Economic Development Committee. I guess everybody's had a chance to read the draft minutes. And if there's any comments there, we can handle that either through our CAO or myself. I think really, other than getting through the agenda, one of the highlights was we finally had a person from the chamber attend the meeting, Ange Phillips. And as a result of her attendance, we suggested that maybe she would consider being the chamber, the mayor's laughing, the chamber's rep. And we made a motion to that effect, that the council appoint Ange Phillips to the Economic Development Committee as representative from the Mahone Bay Tourism and Chamber of Commerce
Okay.
to that committee.
All right. Councillor Feeney.
Sorry, Mayor, I'll second that motion.
Okay. Moved and seconded that Ange Phillips be appointed to the Economic Development Committee as the rep from the Mahone Bay Tourism and Chamber of Commerce. All in favor? Motion's carried. And I must say that Ange Phillips is quite engaged at the Vic these days. They had 50 people last weekend stop into the Vic looking for information and assistance. They're quite pleased with it. Cemetery Committee, June 15th meeting.
Okay, again, we had our committee. It was meeting. It was highlighted with staff person Kelly Redden giving an update on the mapping of the park cemetery. In a nutshell, what they're striving to do is to complete essentially the same idea with GPS and so on that can go on the website, taken off of the what was done at Bayview. And I think that's just was really a great project, and it's proceeding very well. And of course, it's within cooperation with Chester, Nick Zink, and Kelly are heading up that program. Also at the meeting, there was a discussion about the survey of the boundaries of Park Cemetery. It's never been done, but because a survey was done on a property from the Northwest Road, it looked like it was an advantageous time for us to go ahead. And there was a motion on the floor to have the survey of the direct staff to have a survey of the boundary of the Park Cemetery. The estimate, or the only, I guess there was 3 requests sent out. Is that right, CAO? And there was only 1 response received for $4,700. I was quite surprised that about the amount. It sounds not very high for a full-blown survey. So there was a motion put forward to council to approve that.
Direct the staff to complete the survey of Park Cemetery.
I'm happy to second that motion to complete the survey, Mayor.
Okay, moved by Councillor Bain, seconded by Councillor Feeney to have the Park Cemetery surveyed. All in favor? Motion's carried.
Okay, at that same meeting, we had another motion. A little bit of background would be to repair or replace the fence and the gate at the Bayview Cemetery, which of course is right by the Vic. And that would be part of the streetscape program. And again, it was a recommendation from the committee and a motion to council that it be supported to proceed with that, direct staff to look at the fence. I'll ask the CAO to make a comment on the budget for that, because I think under the streetscape you indicated it would be a viable project.
Yes, yeah, this recommendation from the committee comes about an hour behind our approval to submit that for provincial funding. But that's still appropriate. You know, obviously we want to show the linkage to the committee for suggesting that the fence needed the work. In the latest draft, it's down as $10,000 for the fence and gate. Derek and I have put out some feelers in terms of quotation, but we don't have all that information right now, and the deadline's coming up. What we'll end up having to do, I think, is work with the cemetery committee to discuss how far we can go with the money that we have. So if we get the approved funding, hopefully we can focus on the Edgewater Street facade. At the end of the day, I think both the Edgewater Street and Clearland Road facades, the fences, Derek and I have been out and walked them if anybody's seen them recently. They're both, the chain link is not in great shape anymore either. So it's just a question of how far we can get, and then if there's still work that's needed.
This may carry into 2021.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's that, the motion was to that effect. Does everyone understand the motion, what we're doing there? I think anyone that has really had a look at it can realize that the repair or replacement is necessary.
Do we have a seconder on the motion, Deputy Mayor? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Motion's carried. The last item is the minutes of the Asset Management Committee meeting. Does anyone have any questions? It keeps growing and growing. It's becoming a huge document to try and manage. But I would, a CAO, you can comment on this, but we have paid tuition for an online course on asset management for elected officials. Right?
Yeah, I can comment on that. So we're always looking, part of our standing item on this committee's agenda is asset management training, looking for opportunities. NSFM has an online course, takes a little bit under an hour. Well, depends on who you're, I guess, takes about an hour, depending on your familiarity. It's an automated course. It's a, you know, I've gone through it initially and I thought that it was high level, but could be valuable, especially as a refresher. We sent it out to the committee members, and I was going to follow that up by sending it out to council, but one of the committee members jumped on real quick and attempted to use it, found a technical difficulty. I reported it, and it still hasn't been addressed. So as soon as we get that technical difficulty ironed out, I'll send that out to everybody who might be interested.
Thank you. Okay. I think that concludes the meeting for tonight. Deputy Mayor looks thrilled. Anybody have anything else to add? Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Deputy
moved.
Mayor, seconded by Councillor Now, all in favor. Good night, everybody. Drive carefully on your way home, eh? Councillor Carver?
Are there any questions from the gallery?
From the gallery, yes. I wrote it down right there. Questions.
No, we
There are
have
no
no questions.
Done?
Yes.
Now, we've either bored them to death or
Summer.
they had all their questions answered. I wonder which one it was. Anyway, good night, everybody.